Okay, we're talking today with Bill Walsh. What year were you inducted?
In 2007, 15 years ago.
2007, yep. Bill, you've had a varied career. Started as a priest, went into social service work, then went into hotel operation, tourism, promotion, and management. As you look over the arc of your career and the experiences in your life, what are the memories that you point to when somebody asks you what changed the trajectory of your life and why?
Well, boy, that's a loaded question. I struggled forever going into the priesthood, and I had spent 8 years in boot camp and officers training, just like the military. And then I spent 12 years active as an active priest. Loved every minute of it. I love being a priest. I love helping people, and to be an instrument of God's grace. It doesn't get any higher than that. And but then Vatican II came along, and we began to understand the church in many different terms. And basically, I lost my brothers. Pat Carey from Mitchell went on to Marquette, head up the theology department at Marquette. Tim Willard from Yankton went on. He married the young woman who was head of ACLU at the time, became one of the top lawyers in New York City. I mean, we had some really good priests. And so I basically lost my support group. But and the other thing I think that was happening, and it was happening to me, and it was happening, it's going to happen here to the Hall of Fame, is that heretofore a lot of young men or a lot of young women would go into the nunnery or the priesthood as a lifetime thing. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden we said, well, I've put in my 20 years, maybe I should do something else and still be committed to my faith and my God, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's where I was at. And I knew I was at that age where I better make the decision to get out while I could still earn a living. You still have to be practical on that stuff. Mm-hmm. And I had a couple of close guys that stayed in. Father Jerry Holtzman, Father Jimmy Doyle, great priests. They stayed in because I think they were at that time in their life where they didn't want to start over. But now, Marcy, as I work with young men and women at Ellsworth Air Force Base, a lot of them go 20 years and then they say, well, I want a new career. And I know one young couple that spent 20 years in the Air Force, and then 20 years with American Airlines, and now they ranch in Texas. So they've had 3 careers. And I think that's going to hit eventually in my daughter's profession. They change careers ever so often anymore, Mm-hmm. So we're not looking at, and maybe I was ahead of my time in that, saying, I've done my thing. I'm bored with my sermons because I've given them 3 or 4 or 5 times, And I used to do, when I was at the cathedral in Sioux Falls, I did 50 funerals a year, 50 or 60 funerals a year. I remember going back, one day I had a funeral in the morning, and I had a wedding, and I had another funeral. I went back to the back of the cathedral, and I looked around and I thought, I don't know who I'm burying. It wasn't until I got up to the altar and read the card that I realized who I was burying. So that factory didn't appeal to me, anymore. And I still have the highest admiration for anybody that goes into the priesthood or sisterhood. But for me, it was time to move on. And I think eventually, my former parish, they fell in love with Joe. They fell in love with Joe. They would have no problem.
Your wife, Joe.
Yeah.
Your now wife, Joe.
Yeah. That if I would have came back and served as a married priest, they wouldn't have had any difficulty.
Yeah.
What the church has done is ordained a lot of married men who are deacons. Mm-hmm. I think there are now 5 deacons for every priest.
Mm-hmm.
So it's only a matter of time that the church will recognize a married clergy, especially
Right.
the Western Rite. So,
Right. Well, I can see, I appreciate you talking about how that had to be a decision that you had to think long and hard about and struggle with. Your next career progression then to work in social services seems like it was a natural progression from the
Exactly.
priesthood.
Exactly.
But then we get to 1980 and you become a hotel owner and operator.
Yes.
That was a real pivot. How
Yeah.
did that happen?
Well, it happened. Unfortunately, I was with the West River Mental Health at the time, and we had a great team. And that was at the time that they were taking mental health people out of the institutions like Yankton and say, we'll keep you in the community and then try to provide all the necessary support services in the community. And they're still doing that. And it's also true the prison system and juvenile delinquency. The whole philosophy is keep people in the community where they can be close to their family, be close to the services that all of us need, all the support services that all of us need. And so anyway, make a long story short, we got married at Rochford on New Year's Eve. We had Father Michael O'Reilly from Marty Mission. Bob McBride was the Methodist priest, or Methodist minister for Joe. O'Reilly was the priest for me. And we had a wonderful wedding. And then afterwards, we went down to the hotel and had the reception. The bishop said, don't have a big wedding. And I said, oh, yeah, that's fine. We'll just invite our family. But he didn't say anything about the reception. So we invited 250 people to the reception. And it was wonderful. It was wonderful. And at that time, there were 3 partners in the hotel, and one partner was leaving. So the other 2 partners said, would you become a partner in the hotel? Well, yeah, I always wanted that bar downstairs.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
One of my favorite places is the
Yeah.
Franklin Hotel in Deadwood, Dirty Nellie's Bar. Yeah.
Dirty Nellie's downstairs. And I
It's like the
thought,
old Irish pub.
oh man, it just was a sleeper. So I said, well, we'll become partners if I can have that bar. And it was a great 10 years. I was a saloon keeper for 10 years.
Yeah.
And it was always great when the Masons came over every month from the Masonic Temple across the street, and they would walk in and they would say, hey, Father Bill, 3 buds.
Yeah. Well, they talk about the confessor as the bartender, and
Yeah.
you had practice in both.
Well, and I really believed that. I mean, it was great interaction. We kept I just heard a recording of our first weekend, which we had Sweet Rain. Nobody ever heard of jazz in Deadwood.
Mm-hmm.
And we played a lot of jazz, a lot of Irish tunes, and a lot of different music. But the bar jumped and the hotel jumped. We did a lot of crazy things every month in the hotel to attract people to come into the hotel. And I mean, nobody ever celebrated the end of Prohibition, but we did.
Yeah. Well, I remember, and I think it's important to remember the context of time. So this was about 1980
Yeah,
that you went into
exactly.
this.
Yeah.
Homestake Mine was still operating.
Yes.
1985 was announced that it was going to be shutting down,
Yeah.
was going to fundamentally change the Northern Hills.
Yes. Yeah.
Tell us about how you got involved then in the discussions about, this was a high hill, legalized gaming at the time it was passed in 87,
89.
89. I thought there was an
Or
election
excuse me,
before I left
88.
it. Yeah.
88. Yeah.
There was only Vegas and Atlantic City gaming.
Exactly.
So this was a high hill. This
Yes.
was not this was not a chip shot.
No.
How did the discussions come about? What was kind of your thought about that? Did you have any moral struggles with that
Oh,
in terms
sure,
of,
yes.
okay, tell us about that.
Yeah. Well, I always sort of struggled with gambling, and then I recognized that a lot of the moral theologians in America were Catholic theologians, were not opposed to gambling, and so that helped me in my own consciousness, even though when we legalized it, part of the legalization process was I went before the ministerial board in Sioux Falls and the one in Rapid City, both 2 times. And I would tell my buddies, I had a lot of buddies that were ministers, don't preach against this when the vote comes. I said, this is just going to be a step above Catholic bingo.
Did they buy that,
They
Bill?
bought it.
Yeah.
But at that time, that's what it was, because we had only $5 bet limits. But yeah, I struggled with it a long time, and we tried, I think in 1982, to legalize, to allow communities to vote on it, whether or not they wanted legalized gambling. So there was always, and that didn't pass, but there was always this rumor in Deadwood, let's bring gambling back, you know. And as I know in politics, everything's timing. And so when the state in 1986 passed the lottery, I called up my buddy Mike Tricano, Notre Dame graduate, and said, Mike, this is the time to go. Let's get organized, and that's what we did.
And Mike's family company was Black Hills Novelty, and been there since
and
third generation business.
we had the You Bet committee, Tom Blair and his wife, actually
Nelson's,
the 7 of
Melanie
us.
Nelson's,
And I mentioned this when I went into the Hall of Fame 15 years ago. 7 people in any community can turn it around. I don't care if you get 7 people really motivated and involved in the community, you can turn it around. And basically, those 7 plus another, this is almost biblical, another 12 really strong leaders that helped us. And we went to the legislature. We got beat, I think, by 3 votes in the House. And then Murray Dunn said, well, let's put it on the ballot. And I said, well, why not? You know, let's put it on the ballot and let the people vote on this. And that's what we did. We collected 35,000 signatures. Those people who think that's an easy job, I got to tell you, if you can get 12 people a day to sign your petition, that's really something. But we got it on the ballot, and you know, we pushed the idea, let's make Deadwood, let's restore the buildings in Deadwood, and let's make Deadwood fun again.
And I think that's a key that you touch upon. It was one thing to pass limited gaming, but the proceeds funded a historical preservation commission.
Right.
A lot of infrastructure development, a lot of things that had been lost to time had been rediscovered.
Yeah, and it was not only in Deadwood, but we put out 10,000 grants across the state every year.
What do you think Deadwood would be like today had limited gaming not passed?
Oh, I think we were losing the people that kept Deadwood alive, the businessmen and women. They were all aging. So I don't know if we could have survived or not. I'm sure we could have survived, but not to the extent that we have been able to really do a lot of historic preservation, and not only downtown, but the houses around Deadwood. They've all received a lot of money to renovate and restore those homes, and so we have a very strong marketing group in Deadwood now, and almost every weekend is packed with people. I mean, it's fun again. It's exactly what we thought we wanted to do, and so. And from there, I got to tell you, one of the first guys that called me was Joe Kernan. You're Joe from South Bend.
Former governor of Indiana,
Yeah,
mayor of South Bend.
And he said, let's, Bill, can you come out here, and because I want French Lick and West Baden to have gambling. And I said, sure, Joe. And he and I became close friends. And I went out there and presented exactly what we were doing, and then they came to Deadwood, and they got it on the ballot, and they passed it in Indiana. And that was true of Colorado too. A gentleman down at Cripple Creek, Colorado, I mean, he called me almost every week to figure out where we were in that process, and when we got it in, he brought a lot of people to Deadwood to explore that whole thing, and they passed it. And then St. Charles, Missouri was the same thing. I went down there and helped them develop that. But so that's where it took off, you know. Once we cracked the ice. It really went everywhere, and hopefully God won't keep it against me. I worry about that, you know. So.
So since you've retired and stepped back from your business career, you're still a big promoter of South Dakota tourism. But talk a little bit about your efforts with Black Hills Press Club and Forum, and what was the thinking behind that? You're still very engaged in that. I've seen you there once a month.
Yeah.
What was important to you about that?
Well, you know, I could see the polarization, and I got to tell you, Marcy, it's not a recent polarization. It's been going on for 50 years. I just was reading some of the journals I wrote when I was trying to decide whether to stay in the priesthood or not, and I talked a lot about, you know, the far right, the far left, and never the twain shall meet, and so I just thought this is a time to really start bringing people together and having a discussion, because we need to understand each other. We need to understand where other people are coming from, whether you're liberal or conservative or in between. And the key, I think, because I went to St. John's University where there were 200 monks. Half of them were liberal, half of them were conservative. Mm-hmm. But they all celebrated Mass together. They all broke bread together. You know, they never took their liberal or conservative policy. That didn't turn off the other monks who were not that way, and so I thought, let's try this, and so we've been trying it for 8.5 years. Marnie Herman is my co-host. Marnie is a solid Republican. I'm a solid Democrat, and it's just been very successful, bringing people together, having speakers, and allowing people to break bread together, but then to ask a question. No statements. We don't allow for anybody to get up and give us their philosophy. You know, it's asking questions of the speakers, then sit down and listen to the speaker. You know, I mean, listening is the key to understanding, and thus far, it's been very successful, and we're thrilled that you're a part of the team now.
I'm glad to be back working on it.
Yeah.
What else is keeping you busy?
Well, I do a lot of things. I've been involved with Ellsworth Air Force Base for 40 years. Ever since I opened that bar, and all the B-52 guys used to hang out there, and they got me involved with Ellsworth, and so I've been involved as an honorary commander and a mentor to the honorary commanders for almost 40 years. I love those people. They bring such a sense of class to the Black Hills. I mean, they're a great bunch of men and women, and Commander Joe and his wife were my commanders with the 37th. And so I'm getting to know kids from 30 years ago that are now commanders, and it's fun. And I love the liturgy and the pageantry and everything involved with the Air Force. And they allowed me to go up and be a co-pilot one day, and you know, that was one of the highlights of my life, to be able to go up in the air. And the only thing I want now is to be able to go to California, help bring in the B-21 when it gets up. Because a bunch of us went in 35 years ago to bring the B-1 in. And so that's been a great get together. And before the pandemic, we were involved with Catholic people who had graduated from Catholic universities and colleges, and that's another big thing that I really am involved in, because it's such a challenge these days to keep people in the pews and knowledgeable about what they're doing, you know, and so we've got that going. And then I got a grandson, and I wrote Robert Redford and said, "Move over. I've got your replacement."
No pride of
No,
the grandparent
no,
there.
no.
Yeah.
There's something else, and my daughter Mackenzie is head of sales for Blue Peak, and it's just exciting. We have an exciting life.
But you still think about, because I know you well enough to know, you still think about what world would that grandson of yours inherit.
Yes, yeah, and part of me is fearful because of everything that goes on, and the climate change. That's big on my mind. I don't want him to inherit the earth in which it's all burning up or flooding, that type of thing. And but I've got great confidence in the future and in the young people of the future. And I look at my daughter, just a loving, bright person, and my son-in-law. It's great to be around those young people, and they're inheriting what, for good or evil, what has happened. And I'm very positive about the United States today. I really am very positive for our democracy, and we just got to keep working at it. Historically, these things have been back. It's hard to beat the '60s. For polarization.
And turmoil, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. I mean, we were shooting kids on college campuses and riots all over the United States, and our involvement with a war that nobody wanted to be involved in, and that was a tough time, and my phones were tapped.
That's really interesting context when you bring that up, that sometimes when we live through a period we think it's never been better,
Right.
or worse.
Yeah.
And you hear people talk about how bad things are. The reminder that we've lived through bad things before is often important.
Not only that, but we've lived through such economic times. I mean, when I was a young boy, about 10, I drove a team of horses to Shock. My grandmother didn't have electricity, oil lamps, no running water, outside bivvy, and they thought they had it pretty good. and just think of, and a lot of people never got out of the counties in South Dakota.
Right.
But now they travel the world over. I mean, it's just amazing to me the technological progress that we've made, and the fact that a lot of people have been able to grow economically. I think that idea that South Dakota's a poor state is a bunch of baloney. We've got a lot of people that are making a lot of money in the state, and we're a pretty progressive state. So anyway, I really believe in the future, and that's why I stay involved. Because I look at the people that are being inducted into the Hall of Fame this week. They've all made tremendous contributions to their community, and that's all sort of changed over the years. We used to put a lot of emphasis on statewide performances. Now it's not only statewide, but how are people performing in their own community, and the whole idea of excellence. I mean, it's an old Greek term, and it was so much a part of the Kennedy administration back in the 1960s. I love to see that come back in and see the excellence of our inductees. Great inspiration to me.
Well, and you touched on something earlier about the impact that one person or a small group of people can make. I'd like you, because you and I had the shared experience this week of losing someone that we knew well, way too young.
Yeah.
Somebody told me you made a comment that we should have wakes while we're alive. But we all have to think back about it's when none of us are gonna leave this world upright.
That's right.
How do you want to be remembered?
Just as a good guy, who decided to try to make a difference, whether it be in priesthood or out in the world, in politics. I've been involved in the political field for a long time. And, you know, I remember in tourism, Joe and I being in London one time, working in tourism, trying to get English over here to America. And we said, well, let's go to the play tonight. And so we were in the taxi cab, and all of a sudden this limo pulled up right next to us, and this little lady waved. Here it was the Queen. So that has always been a big, I love to interact with people that come out to the Black Hills and enjoy the nature and all the qualities that we have in the Black Hills. And it's a real balance. We have to, you know, we don't want to get overloaded either. And thank you for asking that question. And now you may want to ask my wife how she feels about it. But we've had a great marriage, 44 years. I think we dated for 4 years before that. And we've got a great daughter and son-in-law and grandchild. And let's just make it a better world for them, you know.
Hear, hear. Thank you, my friend.
Thank
Good
you,
to talk
Marcy.
to you.
Yeah, it's great to see somebody who had Joe Kernan as a mentor. One of the great, I can't tell you the many stories that Joe told me, but nice to have you back in South Dakota.
It was an honor to have gotten to know him.